Leslie was speaking about,
I was just was mentioning we're going to talk about inspections today and how it sort of figures into all of our different professions.
Yeah.
right,
So, from the beginning process in every real estate deal, it's always recommended to do an inspection. There are people who waive the inspection. I don't think that's the best
recommended.
option. And certainly, it's important to be available and be at the inspection with the prospective buyer so that
Correct.
they know exactly what's going on
Right,
versus sending someone and reading the report later.
right.
Always recommend it. I'll
Yeah.
let you jump in.
No, absolutely. I also recommend, when you make an offer on a house, you could say that it's subject to inspections. You could waive, as Leslie said, the inspection. I do not recommend it. Or you could do it for informational purposes if you want to make your offer a bit more competitive. So it's basically saying that you'll inspect, but you just really want to understand, the systems of the house and what's involved in the house, but you won't renegotiate after the inspection, is typically what it normally means. I think it's very important to have a licensed home inspector do it. We usually recommend an architect or an engineer or somebody who's licensed. So it's very important. I also recommend, obviously for a purchase, but if somebody's renting a home, many of these homes are very old, and it's very important to inspect a house, especially if you have children, if you're concerned about lead or any environmental issues, as well as if you're buying a co-op or a condo, even if you can't inspect the roof or the major systems of the building. But it's kind of good to know what you're buying, or they have an electric
Right.
panel or appliances. I think it's very important to really know that, especially for a co-op or a condo or an HOA. If you find something significant, it could impact the financing. Correct,
Right.
Marie?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like it's important to make a distinction between certain types of inspections because I think that it can be very commonly misunderstood that, what we're talking about right now is a home inspection, which as the bank, that's not something a lender will require. Typically does not require a home inspection, right? That's really more for the homeowner. Perhaps it's with, like you said, maybe there's not going to be any negotiation after they get the
Right.
contract. Sometimes maybe there is. But the inspections that the lender is going to require is an appraisal inspection, which is different than a home inspection. It's really just an appraiser does go through and might notice, if there are any leaks, in the ceiling or, discolored paint, that sort of thing. But an appraiser is not going in and checking the plumbing or going on top of the roof or, checking the HVAC system, right? I mean, he or she is basically measuring the home and doing other on-site visuals, that will then ultimately comp it out to other homes that are going to use other homes that have sold. One thing that I want to, something that, and it's because it's a recent deal, actually on a loan of mine that's closing hopefully this afternoon, where the borrowers did do a home inspection. There was some noticeable discoloration on the ceiling in a couple of the rooms. And we as the lender required that a structural engineer, or somebody licensed come out and say that that the property was structurally sound, right? Because otherwise we were not going to secure our financing on it. So, three types of sort of reports right there, right? A home inspection might be different than a structural engineer, is different than an appraiser
Right.
going out there.
It as well. Um, Came up last week on a condo that's supposed to close in about 3 weeks, mid-December, and the roof is being replaced in the entire complex and their individual
Yes.
buildings. And the building was in fact replaced, and it has other electrical issues, but the lender was aware of
Right.
it, and as a result, they're possibly not. They've declined the loan because the entire complex was not replaced, which is it's I think banks are becoming very risk averse, and they're very concerned about any kind of structural issues or renovations that have to be done in a complex, so before they lend on it.
So that's a really that's a really great example to bring up, because what goes on the back end that most people don't see when they're getting a loan is, where, like, most lenders, when they're lending money, they are then trying to, like, take that loan off their balance sheet, have an investor like a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac, sort of buy that loan. Your loan is still with the bank. You're still making your payments to the bank, whether it's Citizens or Citibank or Chase or whomever. Um, but it's Fannie and Freddie that have said, if there is any construction going on or anything, like, let's say the roof needs to be replaced, and even if there's a plan, and even if they're in the midst of
Renovation.
fixing that roof, Fannie and Freddie are like, we are not investing on any of those loans until work has been completed. So if you go to a lender and that lender only does loans on condominiums or co-ops that Fannie and Freddie say are okay, then yes, that loan's going to be turned down. Then what you need is a portfolio lender who's willing to look at it and say, okay, you know what? We know that they're doing work, and yes, the whole building hasn't been replaced yet, but there's a plan. They have the money. They've budgeted for it. We're going to lend and put it on our balance sheet. We're going to give them a different kind of loan, a portfolio loan. Sometimes the rate might be higher, but these are the scenarios, right, that present itself. And so that, if that's the situation of anybody that's watching this, like, know that just because one lender said no doesn't mean all lenders will, but ask the questions and find out, why is it being turned down? Why won't the bank lend on it? Because usually it's that sort of constraint.
Right, so I think it's very, very important, if you're buying something, if you know, or if the lend, make sure the lender knows that there are capital improvements being done in the complex, right?
Yeah.
Your building per se, but in the entire complex, they may take it to a different lender, as you just said.
Right.
I
Right.
think it's very also important to understand, when you're buying something, really what the inspector looks at, right? So they're looking at not only the interior of the house, they're checking electrical, they're checking all the major systems of the house, the heating, the hot water tank. They're looking at the windows, they're looking at the appliances, but they're also looking at the roof, as we said. They're looking to make sure that there's no mold or any
Right.
kind of dental issues, such as they test for radon, they look if there's asbestos. They're always checking for underground oil tanks, even if you say there isn't, or it's been removed. They're looking for underground oil lines in the basement. It's very important, to really, for the inspector, who's really has to be knowledgeable in these areas. It's like going on a treasure hunt, right? They're looking for, and being a really good detective, to really uncover underground oil lines, or they have to know if there's a septic tank, right? Septic tanks are very important because they're tied to bedroom count, not bathroom count, or not.
Right, and then you have to look at the Department of Health and see
Right.
how many bedrooms are on the count. And also, the septic inspection is not done by a regular inspector. You have
Correct.
to get a separate septic inspection done, and they figure out whether it passes or not. And then that becomes like an issue, whether it needs pumping, or sometimes the systems have roots in them.
Right.
Sometimes there's boxes that need to be fixed. So that's a whole different area, because the actual inspector, the regular inspector, is not able to test those things. So that's a separate inspection if you're buying sort of in an area where there's not sewer lines.
Right, right. And I've seen some home inspectors even say, like, look, I've noticed this. You should get a specialized so and so to come out to do like a deeper dive, or, if that's something that, is of concern to you, right? Like, where they'll do what they feel they can go up to, right?
Right. Well, the same with well water, right? In some communities in Westchester, I think before you sell, you have to show that the water has been tested, usually on the part of the seller.
It's
And
usually within 10 days of the contract signing, you have to do an inspection, and that's actually at the seller's cost.
correct.
Mm.
If it fails, you have to then get a new test, do a new test, treat it and get a new test. They usually shock it and then they test it again.
Maybe one thing thing too that you might want to comment on, Leslie, is like how, we know with single family homes it's and such, right, in New York that the seller now has to complete this
Property condition report.
property condition form, right? And that in and of itself, like if you, let's say you receive that, you look at it as the buyer and you're like, oh, well, everything looks perfect. I guess I don't really need to get a home inspection, right? What would you say to that?
And relying on it. And in fact, in our contracts, we say we don't warranty. It's not treated as a warranty.
Right.
It's not treated just to the best of your actual knowledge. And I always say to my clients when they're filling it out, if you don't know, definitely don't guess on these things
Right.
as a seller, because you want to be very clear what you know and what you don't know. When they ask about foundations and footings, probably don't know anything about those
Right.
things. I mean,
Right.
want to be only answer to the best of your knowledge as to what's going on in the house. Even in my own house, I definitely don't think I know a lot of things about it.
Right.
Same. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
People don't know about what ampage they have and the questions in that that document. Maybe if you had a flood,
Right.
Right.
but other than that, it's
It's,
pretty much, an unknown, and
Right.
I definitely think you cannot rely on it. It's nice and helpful. Maybe it tells you a little bit more about and gives you a little more color about the house, but
Right.
not something you can rely on.
No,
Right.
I think it's very important when you're doing your inspection. And this also, to Leslie's point, the general home inspector, a licensed home inspector, is not typically testing for oil tanks, right? They'll identify it. Maybe the realtor can find out information if there has been a history of an oil tank. In many cases, it's been removed, and in some cases it's not been removed. So you may have to hire a separate tank removal inspector, somebody who removes the tank, files the permits to really close out the whole issue with oil tanks. So you'll have to hire somebody else, first test the tank if there is a test, or search for the tank to see if there is one, because people think, oh, it's been removed. Well, in many cases it's not been
It
removed,
hasn't been. Right.
and then they have to remove it and then test the soil. So there are a lot of different steps involved in the home inspection. As what Leslie said, often clients will say to me, we're very busy, it's holiday time, or I just had a new baby. Do I have to attend the inspection? Absolutely. I think it's very important that at least one person who's buying it, if it's a couple,
Yeah.
must should attend the inspection, because then you see things, you understand it better than just reading a report and asking the questions.
Agreed.
Agreed.
100% agree.
Right. I think these, an inspection is really a very important part of buying a home or condo or a co-op or even renting, as I said before. And you really should know what you're buying, because even if your inspection was for informational purposes, you can at least know what the issues are and then prepare yourself in terms of the costs before you either buy it or close on it.
Or step away.
Right, or step away.
If there's some major structural issue that's not easily fixed and it's going to cost several $100,000, that may be your decision to walk away from the property too.
Yeah,
and buy something else.
I try to explain to clients too, like it's kind of like when like maybe when you go to buy a car and you see it from the exterior and you're like, oh my God, it looks so great, and like, I just want it. The same thing can happen when you walk into a home or a condo. I mean, a fresh coat of paint can conceal a lot of, things, right, that a home inspector will be able to find. So yeah, try not to be, you don't want to have blinders on, which, many of us, it's, tend to do that when we see something that we're like, oh, I really like this. I really like the price. I really like the location. I'm going to make it work regardless.
I hope you have a good budget and a good pocketbook to make it work, because
Right.
a lot of mold and water stains and all sorts of cracks in the foundation. So it's very important to hire somebody who is very qualified to do the inspection.
Yes.
Right?
Agreed.
So
Absolutely.
if you have any questions, please give us a call or email us, or we'll see you next week on Instagram Live. And we wish everybody
Very happy
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Very happy and healthy Thanksgiving.